let's talk about my favorite reads of 2017. Every year I set myself a goal of reading about 30 new books. And as you know, if you've been following my videos, that includes audiobooks. I count those as having read the book because I'm getting the experience of the book on audio. I like to keep track of my reading on Goodreads, and this is my currently reading list, which I probably won't finish, books that I probably won't finish before 2018. But I like to keep track on Goodreads of the books that I'm currently reading, but also the books that I would like to read, so that when it's time to pick out a new book, I've got my list available, and it's really easy to just pull up when I'm in the bookstore or the library and find my next great read. This year, I didn't do as well as I usually do. I can usually meet that goal of reading 30 books, but I took on a new job this fall, and so I didn't get as much reading done in the second part of the year as I had hoped to. But my reading this year was really varied, which is one of the things that I shoot for as a goal in selecting the books that I'm reading for any given year. So this year, the range of my reading went all the way from Plato's Republic, which I read with a group on Goodreads called Classics on the Western Canon, a really smart group that I love to read with when I'm taking on something challenging like Plato's Republic. And on the other end, I read a kid's book by Kate DiCamillo called Flora and Ulysses, which I also really enjoyed, and which I partly read because someone recommended it to me, but also because I've been working on writing more for kids, and so I've been reading a lot more kids' books lately. So that's the range of my reading. I've also been noticing in the last few years that I've been reading more nonfiction than I used to. It used to be that everything I read was fiction, and now I've got a pretty good mix of fiction and nonfiction. So I want to share with you some of my favorite reads in both of those categories from 2017. In the category of fiction, there were several books I really enjoyed this year. One of them was Ann Patchett's new novel, Commonwealth. This book has gotten a lot of press and a lot of attention already, so I won't say too much about it except to say that I really enjoyed it. It reads at first like a group of linked stories, and I wasn't sure at first that it was really going to hold together, but in the end it really does. It ends up being a beautifully multifaceted portrait of one blended family, and highly recommended, especially the first chapter, because Patchett really knows how to get us into the story. So I'll post in the link section below a copy of my review that I wrote of Commonwealth in my own author newsletter if you're interested in learning more about that. Another fiction book that I really enjoyed this year was The Orchardist by Amanda Copeland. And this novel is really beautifully written. It's not new, it's several years old, but I really loved Copeland's writing. There's a story here, a rich story about a man who sort of adopts a couple of wayward girls that come wandering through his life. But really what was beautiful about this book was the quality of the writing itself. So you can't read The Orchardist looking for a really fast-moving plot, but you will find rich characters and beautiful writing in this book, and it's well worth your time. The third fiction book that I want to recommend is a historical novel called And After the Fire by Lauren Belfer. Lauren Belfer is a great historical novelist. She's got a couple of other books as well that you might take a look at, but this one is relatively new, just a couple of years old. And it's one of those historical novels that has two parallel stories. One contemporary story that takes place mostly in New York City, and another story that's taking place in Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries. And a lot of times I find those historical novels that have those two parallel threads, I usually find one thread more compelling than the other, but in Belfer's novel, I found that the acceleration of those stories and just waiting for when they were going to intersect was really part of the suspense and excitement of the novel. And ultimately, this novel also asks a lot of big questions, like what is art, and what is morality, and when are we complicit in something, and to what extent can we take responsibility, or should we have to take responsibility for the past and for the actions of our ancestors. So And After the Fire by Lauren Belfer is another one of my favorite picks of the books that I read in 2017. I also read a lot of nonfiction in 2017. A couple of the nonfiction books that I really enjoyed were really popular books that a lot of people have already talked about. One of them was Cheryl Strayed's memoir Wild, and another was an incredible World War II survival story called Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand. You can learn more about those books if you haven't heard about them already, although chances are you have. But I want to give a shout out to another nonfiction book that I really enjoyed. It's called Champagne Baby, and it's by a French woman named Laure Dugas, and it's the story of her coming to America for the first time to work for her uncle's wine distributor business. She grew up in a champagne growing family, so she knew a lot about champagne, but she didn't know very much about French wine, and it became her job to go out and sell the wine on behalf of her uncle's company, and in the process she had to learn a lot about it, and in the process you learn a lot about it. So it's partly the story of a French woman experiencing New York City, living in New York for the first time, but it's also partly the story of French wine. And I took a lot of notes while I was reading this book. I learned a lot about French wine, and I really enjoyed her following her journey of learning about wine, because she wasn't writing from an expert point of view. She was kind of writing for somebody who, like herself, is learning more about it. One of the big things I learned and have been thinking a lot about is the difference between the way the French approach their wine and the way Americans do. We talk about wine in terms of grapes, but they talk about it in terms of terroir, or where the grapes were grown. And that was a really fascinating part of this book for me. So Champagne Baby by Laure Dugas is one nonfiction book that I would highly recommend that a lot of people haven't heard about before. If I'm lucky, I'll get to 26 books by the year's end. We just have a few days left in 2017 for me to do that, and I may finish up the last book I'm reading before then. So next year I get to start fresh again with my goal of 30 and see how I do. But of course, it's not about the number of books you read. It's about the quality of the books you read. Finding books that you're really going to enjoy, that are going to teach you something, that are going to expand your reading habits and your horizons and your thinking. So good luck finding those books for yourself for 2018, and read on.